Hi, I'm Stephen Andrews, Outlaw Bookseller. Welcome back to my Don't Call It Sci-Fi, Call It SF series. And I'm the co-author of 100 must-read science fiction novels, been a bookseller for 37 years now, sold loads and loads of SF over the years, always talking to SF readers and writers. And in today's episode, I want to talk about alternate history, or alternative history as I prefer to call it, which is a really interesting little subgenre. And you don't come across that many books in the subgenre because it's quite hard to get it right. And of course the pioneers, being pioneers, got it right a long time ago. So this is going to be a fairly textbooky selection, though there is one curveball. And it's very, very hard to come up with new ideas. Now, alternative history, you have to come up with something fairly subtle. And I've got one fantastic idea, which I'm not going to tell you, which I'm going to write one day when I've got the time. So I would say to anybody who wants to write alternative SF history, come up with something really, really quite subtle and special, because I think we're ready for it. Because the big ideas have been done. But today we're going to talk about the big ideas. And of course, why is alternative history SF? Well, usually in the stories there is a point in which a change occurs and takes time off in a different strand, things happen, things go in a different way, and pretty much every time you read an alternative history SF novel, the change that happens is scientifically explicable. It's not a magical one, it's something based on something rational. So an example is the classic Hitler wins scenario, in which the Axis powers win World War II, and that's the most common and the most popular, and that's the one that's really crossed over the mainstream in a big way. And the obvious example is Robert Harris's Fatherland, which was a huge hit sort of 25-30 years ago. And, you know, to people in the mainstream readership, this was startling stuff, you know, but of course, those of us within the SF community were used to this kind of thing. In the late 80s, there was a fantastic anthology by Martin H. Greenberg, Gregory Benford, called Hitler Wins, which is out of print. If you can track it down, please pick it up. I don't have a copy to hand, I don't know where mine's gone. So watch out for that, because it's got some great alternative Axis victory stories. So today we're going to start with, you know, probably the definitive Hitler wins story, and that is Philip K. Dick's magisterial, The Man in the High Castle. And this is my Berkeley A format paperback from 1984. I got this from Forever People in Bristol, a shop which anybody from the Bristol South Wales area will remember, a great genre shop, sadly no longer with us, closed about 97. And for a long time, this was actually out of print in the UK, and it was hard to find second hand. So I was delighted to get it, because I'd been reading Dick for quite a long time by then. I think it must have been about 7 or 8 years. And I'm not going to talk too much about the story. I am going to say that I'm not a big fan of the Amazon TV series. And if you've only seen that, forget it. Put it out of your mind and read the book instead. It's far subtler, more literary, more interesting, less melodramatic. And it's very unusual because, of course, Dick wrote this using a very unusual method of composition. He used the I Ching, an ancient Asian divinatory method, which is referred to throughout the text. He used that to plot the book and to take it in different directions. So he set it in an alternate world, and then he used a really, really avant-garde means of navigating us through what happens, rather like the chance and unpredictable things that happen in life, and it's fantastic as a result of that. The second thing I want to say about High Castle is that, of course, it won the Hugo Award, the Hugo Award is a popularity award. It's just fans vote for it. You know, we see it on the covers of books a lot, but it shows how interested fans were in what Dick was doing then in his nascent period, and this was regarded as his first masterpiece. Though I would say Time Out of Joint, which is a couple of years before, is an excellent novel as well. So Dick won the Hugo, and something that Ursula K. Le Guin wrote in an essay about this book, which showed how it changed the genre, was that she said that Mr. Togomi, a focused Japanese character in this, was the first Mrs. Brown in science fiction. And by that she meant that SF needed realistic characters like people next door, people who meet ordinary people, not melodramatic supermen or women. It just needed ordinary people to make it more realistic. And even though I would say Judith Merrill's Shadow on the Hearth has a Mrs. Brown in it, which is some years beforehand, possibly this is more science fictional And I would say that I think Ursula was right, you know, Tagomi and a lot of Dick's characters, they're just ordinary people, and that's what makes them so good as books. They're really quite something. So that's a great one. One more thing to say about this is the end of the book is supremely important, when Juliana Frink realizes what is actually happening in the world of the book. And that's important, the world, the book. It's not so much that she realizes that Hitler has won, or that there may be another place where Hitler hasn't won, but there is a third reality. And I'm going to let you discover that for yourself, but think about that when you're reading it. What is Julia really thinking when she walks out of the high castle? Moving on. Probably the most famous trope in alternative history besides the Hitler wins scenario is the idea of the Reformation never happening, of Catholicism continuing to dominate Europe, of Britain particularly still being under the heel of Catholicism. And there are a couple of great books on this idea. There's a great fun one by John Brunner called Times Without Number, which is now available in a collection called, I can't think what it's called, but it's British Library. The British Library have done it in their SF reissue series. I think it's called The Society of Time, because there are a series of stories, and I know it as Times Without Number, and my copy's in real state, so I must get a new one. But this one is just the one that's in all the reference books. This is my King Penguin edition from the mid-80s of Pavan by Keith Roberts. Pavan first appeared partially as a serial in SF Impulse, a magazine in the mid-60s in Britain. This was Roberts' second novel, I believe, maybe the third. I think that was the third one, The Inner Wheel. The first one was The Furies, which is fantastic. And in this, there's a magnificent opening sequence in which we see history pivot, and the Spanish Armada, Queen Elizabeth is assassinated, and we have a world of the 1960s where there are still steam traction engines, which is moving forward very, very slowly, which is still dominated by Catholicism. And through a series of novellas, you're introduced to this wonderful, slightly archaic world, this beautiful pastoral prose of Roberts, who's kind of a Thomas Hardy of SF, very English, beautifully written. Anthony Burgess chose this for his book, 99 Novels, the best in English since World War II. And, you know, this is really magnificent stuff. This is a book which everybody interested in literature should read. Keith wrote beautifully. He had a very up and down career, should have been internationally famous, was never really appreciated as much as he should have been, except within the genre, where people loved his writing, even though he could be a very difficult man. I've got a lot to say about Keith, and I will say a lot more about him in other videos coming up, because he's one of my favourite writers, and he deserves a lot more attention than he's ever got. Even from people who know his work, I find a lot of them haven't read much of it. And Pavan here in the lovely King Penguin edition, the B format, which was a format starting to dominate things when I started bookselling in the mid-80s. And it's absolutely spectacular. Like High Castle, beautiful literary writing, something that anybody who doesn't read SF could enjoy. Simply fantastic. But there is another similar book which was written a few years later by a well-known figure in English literature who was a big SF fan, and he wrote all sorts of books. Social comedies was his big thing. He was a very irreverent character, and he loved both High Castle and Pavan, and he wrote this book, The Alteration. That's Kingsley Amis, and again, this is about the Reformation not happening, and this is a very witty book. This is the Jonathan Cape first edition, which was still in print in 1987, years and years later, because I just ordered it into the bookshop I was working in, and it came in, and I bought it pristine and new, and it's bagged to keep it nice. It's got a green sprayed edge, and if you can see that up there, a toned text block, and it's really, really funny, and it's about a young boy who is a choir boy, and he sings so beautifully that the Catholic Church in Rome wants to sort of get his bits chopped off, so he becomes a castrati and keeps that voice. There's lots of other things, but there's a wonderful scene in it where the young choir boys are in their dorm and they secretly have hidden some science fiction novels, and there are direct references to both Dick and Roberts, and this is great. This is really fantastic literature. So a wonderful, light, frothy, amazingly well written English take on the idea, and you can't really go wrong. There have been others, as I say, but those are the best too. So what are the other big ideas in alternate history SF? Probably the other classic trope of alternative history, which several people have attempted with mixed results, is the South winning the American Civil War. I think the first of these, I believe is the first, and certainly the best that I've read, is Ward Moore's magisterial Bring the Jubilee. From the title alone, you can see that we are immediately in the presence of complete and total class. Ward Moore's output was relatively small. He's not very well known. This is available in Gollanc's Masterworks. Interestingly, this is my copy from, I think this is 1986-87. This is Gollanc's Classic SF in B format, the precursors of the Masterworks. And they have these wonderful, classy covers, absolutely beautiful books, magnificent. They did about 25 of them. And they stopped doing them in B format because at that point there were still lots of specialist shops in the UK, specialist SF shops dotted around the country who sold loads of Skiffy. And their shelves were set so they could fit on loads and loads and loads of A format paperbacks, like my Philip K. Dick. Let me just do a quick comparison. So there's the PKD next to the Ward Moore. So they weren't very happy about this because it meant they were hard to shelve and they would, not fit into the racking. So this got dropped. But these are the original Masterworks, and this is in Masterworks now, as I say. So this is a bit of a cheat in some ways. I'm just going to show you the cover again because I love it. Because the funny thing is that the alternate history that's reached in this book is access to a time machine. Now I consider that a bit of a cheat, but that makes it even more science fictional, so it's interesting. So this is sort of gentle and pastoral, and it's got a real feel of the South, so it's magnificent, and you can't really go wrong, as I say. And this is a world where, I say, some unpleasant things happen, but it's done very sympathetically and very, very well, so I really recommend that. Probably the most famous other Confederate win book would be Harry Turtledove's Guns of the South, and again that's a time machine book where somebody sympathetic to the Southern states cause takes a cache of machine guns back in time, and that's fun. And Harry Turtledove's done lots of great alternative history and historical based military SF, but for me Ward Moore's Bring the Jubilee is the one, so do go for it. It's a great book, and it's in Masterworks, so do get it. These are like hen's teeth, especially in good condition. I wish I'd bought them all. I've got quite a few of them. At some point I'm going to do a little feature just about these. Finally, the curveball. The book I'm going to show you now is very unusual in that it's a genre straddling book, and I have very definite opinions and theories about genre. I fundamentally think there are only three genres. I believe there's general fiction, science fiction and fantasy. And science fiction and fantasy began as subsets of romance, whereas general fiction is realism. I'm going to expand on that in yet another video, but the beauty of this book is that it's alternate history, but it also has classic fantasy elements and detective story elements, and yet the events which spark the world off are scientifically explicable. And this is Lord Darcy by Randall Garrett in Fantasy Masterworks from Gollanc's, and what a classy looking book. and it's a big book because in here there's one complete novel, Too Many Magicians, which is the famous Lord Darcy story, and lots of others. And I haven't actually read all of this yet because you want to savour them because they're so classy. And Randall Garrett was a big name in American SF in the late 50s. And he sort of faded away a bit after that. He was a real womanizer, apparently, and well known for chasing women while being completely naked at cons. Not the sort of thing you'd get away with these days. He collaborated a lot with the young Robert Silverberg. They did a few books together under pseudonyms. And his work is quite neglected now. But this is absolutely fantastic. If you like Sherlock Holmes type detective stories, very genteel, ratiocination, that sort of thing, and you like history, you can't go wrong, because the paradigm shift in this is that the Plantagenet kings continue their rule of the British Isles, and their significance in the scheme of European history continues. Physics is never discovered, but magic is, and it's a sort of a systematic magic, so there's a kind of scientific feel to it, and that's another thing that's an interesting thing to discuss around the difference between science fiction and fantasy, this outside the scope of this clip. But these are wonderful stories. They just are redolent of style right the way through. They're very, very fine and refined, witty. And, you know, if you're a crime fan, a fan of classic sort of English body in the library crime, and also, you know, the original detective sort of feeling of Poe and Holmes, then, you know, you really can't go wrong. Lord Darcy, really lovely stuff. Great entertainment for anybody who likes well-written fiction. And I can't say enough good about these. Excellent work. So a very difficult book to categorise, and that's my curveball, because it's the one which may not be pure science fiction, and that might throw my entire thesis into disarray, but I really like that, and I really think you should get it. It's fantastic. At the moment, I think all of those books are in print, which is really unusual, and is testament to their status as enduring classics. So probably a predictable list, with maybe the exception of the Garrett. If you have come across any alternative history SF that you think is worthy of inclusion in that canon, please let me know. And remember, don't call it sci-fi, call it SF. This is Outlaw Bookseller signing off for now. And remember, whatever you do could change history, so be careful.